From the trailer for episode 4, I think Alicent's mistake has set this in motion, has pushed things past the point of no return, especially because she's not willing, and it can be argued is unable to do anything at this point to turn back the tides. From what we see in the trailer and from what's taken place here, I believe war is pretty much going to start. The war really began in this episode. It's been going on now for a few episodes. It's just that you have these triggering moments along the way. Thinking back to when I was in school and they were discussing the world wars, there's usually transgressions along the way that build up to war. So when you think about it, what we see here is, never mind the dragons and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of a realistic portrayal of how wars begin, right? Where you have allies and you have opponents and whatnot, and you and my ally get into some kind of problem, and if I'm a person of my word, I'm gonna back them if you guys really get into it. And then over here, these two have a little tussle, and so now they're in battle and this one gets involved, and it just escalates from there. And that's what we see going on here. I think from episode 4 and onwards, Rhaenyra has to accept that war is inevitable. The war, in part, might involve armies, soldiers on the ground. She's also fortunate to have the Valyrian fleet at her disposal. But dragons are going to come into play. From the previews, you see people catching on fire. You see armies in formation and whatnot. Like I said, I think Alicent's brother is going to continue to be a nuisance, but we see him in continued contact with Cole because I don't think they brought him into the season for no reason. The last we saw him was the first episode of the first season, and haven't really heard or seen anything of him since then. So I think he'll have some kind of a role to play. And from there, I think it's just going to be war. Daemon having to come to terms with some of the things that he's done. Rhaenyra having to accept the reality that she might have to destroy King's Landing to save it from Aegon. And something interesting that I saw was Aegon is a very insecure person, doesn't really like being questioned, and is most comfortable with yes men. There's a scene in the trailer where you see him sitting down with Alicent. It looks like it's just the two of them in a room at a long table, and they're having a conversation where she sounds like she's trying to speak truth to him. And she basically states that he's not half the king that his father was. And it's like, ma'am, Hightower expressed similar sentiments in the second episode and he was dismissed as hand. You're his mom, but it's like both of you really fought quite hard to put this guy on the throne, only to now realize that he is not fit for the position. And yet here you are fighting tooth and nail against Rhaenyra sitting on the Iron Throne. And the reality is, how is it that you're only now realizing this? What exactly was the reason then for you wanting him to be on the throne? Obviously, you didn't pay attention to his character, to his lack of training and experience. Now, granted, you can't be experienced in sitting on the throne until you sit on the throne, but that no real preparations had been made for him to be king. So you wanted him to be king because why? And it's like for you to now realize in so many ways the error of your mistake that you're trying to talk up to him. And I actually found it quite telling that in that conversation, Aegon kind of warns Alicent to watch her mouth. And it's like, number one, sir, you're speaking to your mother. But that shows you how he was trained and raised. To issue what even sounds like a vague threat to your mom because she says something that you don't like, because she questions your fitness and ability for this position that you're filling. And you turn around and you kind of indirectly threaten her. You think of Aemond as well, where he doesn't really seem to have much of any respect for Alicent either. And I think a part of it has to do with how Alicent has raised these two. Where you look back to it, where when they were kids, Aegon was a problem from his youth. As young kids being kind of okay, but as they got older, they became like brats. And you saw her cleaning up their messes instead of making them shape up. If you recall with Aegon and I think it was like the servant girl, well, sure, she comforted the girl, but then at the same time, she tried to clean up the situation for Aegon. Like, there was no real accountability for them, especially for Aegon, maybe Aemond a little bit more. But it's like Aegon was raised as a spoiled brat from the beginning. And now that he's older, you're trying to correct him. It's like, you think about like trees. Like, I remember as a kid growing up in New York that they would plant trees on the street, right? So you'd have like trees every so however many feet or whatever it is cut out into the side. There'd be like space in the sidewalk and you would have a tree planted. You would notice that like with the young trees, when they're like still rather thin and pliable, they would have like these metal chains, one from each side, pulling, right? Like staked into the ground to help the tree grow straight. Right? And you think about it, you try to keep the tree growing straight when it's young because it's pliable at that age. You can't wait for when it grows big and becomes like a mighty oak tree and the trunk is like wide around to then try to direct it. It's too late at that point. And that's kind of what you have here, where Aegon was not intended for this role. And so he wasn't properly prepared for it. He wasn't properly raised for it. And yet you push him into this position, and now you're trying to corral him, to mold him into the position. And the reality is that you've created a monster here. The worst thing you could have done for Aegon, someone who is insecure, looking to prove himself, ill-suited for the position, was to put him in that role where he now has absolute power and authority and feels as though he doesn't have to listen to anyone. You've created a monster. And between that and the Dance of the Dragons that's about to begin, I think we're going to be in for an incredible season, and I am looking forward to it. Those are my predictions for episode 4 and beyond. I think it's going to be an exciting ride from here.
Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.